Welcome to video 3 of this section of this segment on warming up. I'm Jorge Caballero, and in the previous videos we discussed this one exercise that I used. If you haven't seen those previous videos, I would recommend that you watch them. Like I said, they have important concepts about what warming up is and how you can use a warm-up to develop. Now, in the previous videos, we focused primarily on the concepts and what the warm-up was and what you can do, what kind of variations you can have at a basic level. Now, in this video, part 3, we are going to discuss how to use this same warm-up type exercise for intermediate and also advanced players. Now, this is a very long concept in and of itself, so I'm going to give you some possibilities, and they have to do with some of the concepts I mentioned. Now, going to the intermediates, I mentioned the idea of self-profiling. If you haven't seen those videos, this self-profiling is going to sound a little odd, but essentially self-profiling means understanding your own strengths and weaknesses and the areas in your playing that you need to develop. So let's say in the warm-up we had this. And let's say, for example, if you're an intermediate player, you usually will have a pretty consistent IM alternation. Something that is not nearly as consistent is an AM alternation. And so what you want to do with a warm-up now is use the AM alternation and see how well you can build it. So you want to build consistency with your AM alternation. Now let's suppose, let's say I'm an intermediate player, I'm trying to develop this. So the first thing that I will do when I'm warming up is I will start with an MI alternation, in this case, just to add some variety. And I'm feeling pretty confident with that. And then if I think about it a little bit further, then I think, well, how about my AM alternation? And the first thing that I will notice is that if I try to play it, it's not going to be as consistent as my MI alternation. And so the purpose of this warm-up and the idea of profiling means, okay, I'm going to use now the same exercise, same warm-up, to figure out how consistent I can, these two fingers can be when they interact. So I'm going to play here. On that warm-up, use these two fingers for that specific warm-up. Now, that is a type of way of approaching the warm-up that targets a specific problem that you have. Now, let's assume something else. Let's say, and this is usually something that occurs with intermediate players a lot, and that is that they do not know how to play tremolos well. It just so happens with the subject of tremolos is kind of an intermediate to advanced technique, is one that allows you to tell, especially if you're a professional, if you're judging a competition, you can very easily tell how solid someone's technique is by their understanding of how well they play tremolo. It's just one of those techniques that has components that are so intuitive most of the time that it's very easy to tell if someone really understands technique or not by how well they play it. So let's say you're an intermediate that's in a position where you want to improve your tremolo. Okay, so the tremolo involves the use of AMI plus P, not in that order, of course. You start with P and then it's AMI. So if you're not, the first thing that you need to test is how well you can create an AMI alternation. And most often we don't really realize that we don't really understand how to create the right setup for AMI. So what you want to do in your warm-up now is we're going to try this in that possibility. We're going to use AMI, and instead of using the exercise the way I played it in the first videos, I'm going to do this. And because a tremolo is primarily played as free strokes, then I'm using free strokes with my right hand as well. I'm still retaining the order of the fingers, 1, 2, 3, 4, but I'm using this as a tremolo. So okay, now this is not a video about the technique of tremolo, so I will say this. The idea is that you work this out with a teacher. You work out what the technique for tremolo is, and then you use this warm-up as a way to reinforce what you know of that technique. So this video is not discussing the proper way to play tremolo. It's discussing how to use this warm-up to apply a technique that you're studying. Okay, so it's important to mention that there's no time to discuss in this video what tremolo technique is about. Okay, so but going back to what I was doing, so I'm using this as a way to figure out the proper positioning, the proper placement, and the proper activation of fingers for a tremolo technique. Now, if I want to develop it in a different way, I could also use rest strokes for it. Say, and if I wanted more repetitions, I could do more. 4 times, 5 times, it doesn't really matter. So that is an example of what I mean by understanding the concept of profiling and using the same warm-up to address a specific area of weakness. Now, let's discuss another area of weakness for an intermediate player, and that is the control of thumb strokes. And a very simple example, I mean, we find these examples in literature, is how to play, say, a good resonating thumb note, and then against another thumb note that has a different tone quality. Let's say this. Something like that. So as you can see in this specific setup that I used, I'm playing a thumb in free stroke, flesh thumb, and then the note on the 5th string was nail free stroke. So how can I use the same warm-up to target this specific area? Well, I would take this, another example of a use of thumb and developing the thumb. A lot of times players have a difficult time playing thumb notes that are fast, so you can address that by modifying the exercise into this. Something like that. So as you can see, same exercise, but now I'm using a very specific rhythm that essentially gives me 1 long note, 2 short notes. So in total, you have 3 notes that are going at a faster rate. Bum, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that allows you constantly to test your ability to play faster on your thumb, but giving yourself a break every time. So if you had a phrase that goes like this, then you would have a better sense of how to move your thumb in specific areas like that. Okay, so that's how you can use the same exercise as an intermediate player and develop your technique.